Mary Ruth Cook Parry. I was born in Bountiful, no, October the 22nd, 1908, to the parents of Martha Day and Rudolph Cook.
My name is Mark Day Cook. I was born in Bountiful, in a two-room home on Center Street, east of the Stake Center, Bountiful. 1911, March the 9th.
You must have just been, was born and then came up here to Syracuse, is that right?
Then I was a year old when we moved up here.
Well,
I bought this farm,
I'd agree.
40-acre farm. 1912. And there was a two-room house right there on it, right where Christine and Kevin's house is. He bought it from Henry Call in Bountiful. And I don't know what the price, probably the price was around $100 an acre in those days. 40 acres.
I have original owners as Lorenzo Barnes. You ever heard that?
Well, I think
seen it?
Possibly you're right, but Henry Call probably got it from him, and I can remember Dad saying Henry Call.
Yeah. Our farm right next to you was Joe Parry. She owned 80 acres there. And Joe Corbage bought the 40, and then actually wasn't Dad that bought it. It was Catherine Stoker, Dad's first.
So there
first
was
wife.
Ray and Ruth and me and Dad and Mother lived in the two-room house.
What was early life like on the farm as you grew up?
Well, these farms, when we started farming, the water system, we had no water system to irrigate with. And the ground was alkali, half of it was alkali, and it was wet, sandy, blow sand, lizards, coyotes, and we had a chicken coop out in the back.
Was it clear of sagebrush?
No. And the coyotes used to come up and try to get our chickens. We started out irrigating. The West Branch Irrigation Company the incorporation was formed in 1912. About 12 original stockholders.
Well, my dad's name's on that.
I can name most of them.
I got a copy of that. My dad and uncle's name is on it.
But the only thing we could irrigate, the only way we had quite a time to get the water from the canal down 700, down past, well, it's the old Main, South Main there. William Criddle used to live there, down the Navy base is there now. All they could do is plow a ditch along the side of the road and build a wooden box, kind of a deal, to turn the water in on your farm. And even when we farmed, half of the ground wouldn't grow any crop because it was alkali. And then we got into this, your dad and my dad and Ez Thurgood and Dave Thurgood and Roy Briggs and about 8 or 10 of them, 10, 12, dug a drain about 6.5, 7 feet deep by hand from Roy Briggs' place over here down through along the half-mile line into the Bluff Road by hand, laid the tile, and that was the start of draining the ground and getting it so you could farm it, but it didn't. A lot of it wasn't. You couldn't raise nothing on it because it wasn't alkali wasn't on it.
About when would that drain have been put in?
Well, that drain I think was possibly dug in about
I was about
1915, 16.
about 10 years old, 10 or 12 years old when it was put in. Because I used to take them hot drinks down and carry them food to eat. And I've seen my dad come in from digging this trench, and he was had mud froze solid to his boots. And he wore a big black overcoat and a hat to keep warm. And he used to wrap their feet in newspaper to keep them from getting cold. It helped to keep them warm.
That's something. I know it went right down through our property, through the swale.
Through Holt, Jesse Holt thing, down through along the bottom of the half-mile line, over to the Bluff Road.
Got clear down to Joe
Willie's
old home. Still does.
Yeah, still there.
Still there.
Then later, wasn't 3 or 4 years after that, this Sumner Margits came in with a trenching machine and laid all the laterals into that main drain. And then we started getting some crops.
What kind of crops?
Only crops you could raise. We raised hay, grain, potatoes, tomatoes, sugar beets.
Did they have many orchards up in this
Not
area
much.
at that time?
Not many.
My dad used to have one east of his house.
Few trees. Your dad, one east of the house looks like about 2 acres, and Tom Thurgood had one down below here, about where Ken and Jasmine live now. There was about a 10-acre orchard in there.
Getting back to early irrigation before we get on to other things, I have heard that at least Tom Thurgood claims to have been the first one in this general area to bring water in. When he moved on his place about 1890, he put a ditch, I don't know whether it's for this to plow or what, but brought it down from Matt Holt's corner down to this corner and then down onto his place. Have you ever heard that?
Well, I don't remember that part of it. I remember that I think this canal up here, we get our water from now, was built in about 1909 or 10. And the original reservoir we got our water from was East Canyon, but the cement dam that's there now wasn't there then. It was a dirt dam they put in just a little ways east of it, and the farmers put that in and stored the water. When the water gets so low you can see where it was. You can see part of it. Then they put the cement and increased the capacity, but
What about drinking water?
well, let's see. We had pump wells, hand pumps, and the city, Tom Thurgood laid the city water line down.
Well, Mark, can't you remember when we used to go up to Willie Beezer's with that little schooner that Dad made?
Well,
And we used to haul it in a big barrel
there for a while.
for quite a while, and Dad used to put a cloth over it in a tub, and he would bring it down to the house. And we would have to limit our bath water off because he could only go up every so often to get this barrel of water. And that was the first drinking water and the first water that we got for household use.
You probably didn't get indoor plumbing until about when?
Oh. I was married before they got indoor plumbing.
I think when Roosevelt was elected, about 1930 or 32,
That was when I
we
was
had
married
a
in the
tap, just a tap coming up in here,
cold water tap.
cold water tap with a bucket hanging on it, and that's all we had for
Well,
water.
that was, Dad had just one in his house. And it was a cold water tap. But I'd like to say this much. Before the parents moved up here, the day they went to bring their belongings, they had a buckboard with one horse on it. And Uncle Almy was there helping my dad move, and they put everything that they owned in this buckboard. And then they drove from Bountiful up to Syracuse to our little two-room home. And when we come in, it looked so terrible that I wasn't too happy about it, because the weeds, the cockleburs and the weeds and the sagebrush was so high that we could play hide and go seek in the weeds. And our home that we had wasn't complete. One room was, the kitchen was complete, but the bedroom only had just boards that would lead to the bed, and we would have to walk on a plank to the bed, and we had 2 beds in this room. And as we went to bed, we'd have to walk along these planks to get to our bed. And then in later years, they got a floor put in. But at the original home, the bedroom wasn't complete, and yet we slept in it.
There was no plaster,
No,
none like
just
that.
the 2 before
Two
us.
before.
When did your parents finally build this home that's over there now?
1917
1917.
is when they built. Part of it, it's been added on to, but it was 3 bedrooms and a living room and a kitchen. That's all there was then. 1917.
Well, you had a cellar too, didn't you, down there?
Had a basement
Cellar,
underneath.
And
Fruit
there,
room.
there's something else that I remember. When we first moved here, we had coal oil lamps. And my mother had flat irons that she put on the stove to do her ironing with. And I remember a high-pitched salesman come to our place one day, talked my mother into buying,
Electric iron.
it was the iron that she poured some kind of oil in it. And it was a beautiful thing, so my mother bought it, and then she was always scared to use it. So she always kept it up in the cupboard, and us kids were not supposed to touch it. So then in later years, the Utah Power and Light come in with the lights, and Dad paid so much money to get the line down to our place, and that was our line because it cost, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of about $250. And then later on, the Utah Power and Light come and took it from my dad's place down the street farther. It upset my dad a little bit because he figured that each one should pay to have the light put in like he did. He was quite upset over that.
I don't blame him.
But I can remember when we turned the lights on, we felt like we was in a new world because we used to study around these coal oil stoves, around the kitchen table or on the kitchen chairs with one light very dimly lit for us to do our studying. And when the light come on, I don't ever know what happened to that iron that my mother bought, but it disappeared in a hurry.
Be a good antique if we can find it.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is, but you had to pour some kind of oil in it, or gasoline, or some darn thing. And then she wouldn't have to use these old flat irons that she had to heat up on the stove. Winter or summer, she heated her irons on the stove to iron.
Well, what was the best benefit of those flat irons? I remember at my home. Let's see if they did the same with yours.
We used to heat them up and put them in our bed to keep our feet warm.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
But Florence got burnt quite bad one night with one of those flat irons, and she had quite a time with it. She got burned on the leg, and that put a stop to taking the flat irons to bed.
And one thing, we'd wear stocking caps to bed. Keep your ears warm.
Yeah, there's no heat in your
Yeah,
bedrooms
and
back
the
then.
water be froze solid, didn't it?
We never looked out of the windows from fall until spring.
You look at them, you couldn't see anything.
Well, they were
Frosted-
frozen
frost
over.
them a half-inch thick.
Icicles 6 feet long.
Yeah, we'd see them hanging almost to the ground.
Yeah.
down the s- Then imagine going to school, 3 of us, riding a horse. My uncle brought a little blue pony from Idaho.
From the
Name was
Indians.
Chips.
Oh,
Bought her from the Indian reservation. 3 of us rode her to school, and they had a shed down there. We tied her in during the day and ride her home at night. But these roads, none of these roads were gravelled. All they were mud, and sometimes you couldn't get up and down the road with a buggy or a wagon or anything. It was just muddy and wet. I don't know when they started to gravel them, but they used to haul gravel from up the gravel pit there at the mouth of Weaver Canyon in the wagons, put gravel on these roads.
Then they used to scrape them with horse-drawn.
Horses,
What
everything
they used to
horses.
call those scoops?
Fresno,
Fresno.
Fresno.
I can remember after we got up here, I can remember my father saying one time, if it hadn't been for Dan Walker trusting him and helping him, he would have never made it. 'Cause he said there was sometimes no money for food and no food. And he said he went hungry so his kids could have something to eat. Excuse me.
There was, then later on, we got started irrigating the farm and got a shed for some cows, had a few pigs, built a chicken coop to keep the coyotes from getting them. We had eggs, we had our own meat, and then it started into milk and butter, and we'd churn the butter, churn the milk for the butter.
And then
It was tough then.
and they used to take it to the store, 10 cents a pound for their butter. What was it, 12 cents a dozen for eggs?
Did a lot of bartering then, didn't you?
And
Exchange eggs for groceries and butter for groceries, and riding to school on a horse, and it was cold. There was cold winters. You'd get so cold going to school, you couldn't go to class for a couple hours because you had to stand by the heaters and get warm before you could ever write, use a pencil.
this little pony that Mark called Old Jip, she would never ride with a bridle, and all we guided her with was a rope
They must
hooked
have,
over her nose,
they must have broke her with just a loop
in her mouth.
in her mouth. She wouldn't ride with a bridle.
And
She'd throw us off going to school and run all over the Syracuse.
when we come out of school, the kids would line up along the street to snowball us. And Ray would always say, well, lay down, and he'd lean over the horse. And then the middle one would lean over, and I think I was always the last one. And I would lean over Mark, and that horse would lay her ears down, and she would start as we come out of the school, and she went like a streak. She knew what was coming, and we never got her under control until after we turned the corner by the church. And then she settled down, but she would snort. We knew there was trouble when she got that snorting going. But she was a good little pony.
Did you ever butcher hogs?
Yes.
Winter? Could you tell us what you did and go into a little detail about that?
But they used to kill them with butcher knife. Stick them in the throat, bleed them out. And I got some pig hooks that we used to pig hook. They'd have to stick it up in the roof of their mouth and hook it. And you'd have a platform, and a wooden barrel leaning up against the platform and boiling water in it. Hook that pig hook in the, and take that pig and slush it up and down in that hot water to scald it, we'd call it, so we get the hair off. And then when we thought it was done, just pull it out on the platform and take knives and scrape the hair off. Then we dress them out ourselves. Save all the fat. Mother would make head cheese. Take the head and trim all the meat off and make head cheese out of it. We'd eat quite a bit of that. And save all the, what do they call that, fat around the tripe? Make lard out of it. Made a lot of lard. You didn't have no money to buy a lot of that stuff. And wasn't easy, but
If you were like our family, you ate a lot of pork, but no veal.
well, you had to sell veal to get a little money.
That's exactly the same.
You'd raise a veal, we tried to get them to 200 pounds, feed them the cow's milk, fresh off the cow. This Charlie Grossman that used to come around to buy them, he'd come around and look at them when they were ready, $30 for a good fat veal. They'd weigh about 200 pounds. And we thought it was quite a deal to sell a $30 calf. So that's about what we got on it.
Give your father a little money to go on.
Go to the store, you'd have to go in a wagon, go on a horse. I went to the store a lot of times with a gunny sack on the saddle over the front of the horse, no saddle, never had a saddle. Bring home oatmeal and cheese and stuff like that, but you couldn't buy anything that was expensive. Or what I mean is, you got just the vital needs. You couldn't afford it.
What they use the chicken sacks for? The old mash sacks.
They used to make that, shall I tell you, for our undergarments, the dish towels, quilts. I've seen my mother bleach the unbleached muslin out, and petticoats. She would crochet on them all. That's until I was in the 8th grade. I never knew what it was to have anything bought me new. When I graduated, I got my first underslip to go with my graduation dress. So that's what they used the sacks for.
Well, I'd use them flour sacks to make
That's it.
tablecloth, the white cotton flour sack that we take our grain and have it ground. They put it in these white sacks, 10, 15 bags at a time. Use them to make
Quilts out of.
quilts.
Because one of my first quilts that I had in my trousseau was made out of flour sacks that my mother had bleached and had a design drawn on it that was put in my trousseau that my mother helped me make. So that was special for me.
Dad, when was the well that you had
Oh,
out in back in the
I-
barn built?
I've got a story to tell about my mother and the pigs.
I don't think about it.
Years ago, we hadn't been living on the farm very long, and Dad had an old sow that had little pigs. And he was digging test holes on the farm to find out where the water was. And
You
they were,
didn't use water witches back then?
well, he would dig down in and test to see if there was any water in this hole.
You did keep digging until you got water in the hole, then you could say, well, the water level is
We've hit it.
certain.
So one day, this old sow come down the driveway, and she had about 12 little pigs along behind her, and they fell in this hole. And my dad and mother was sick. There was these 12 little pigs that all fell in this little hole, which was not very big. So my mother got a rope, put a lariat on the end, tied it to a hole, and we fished all day long for those little pigs out of the hole. And we got every one alive but one, and it died. The last little pig we brought up was dead. But we fished in this little hole to bring those little pigs up all day long.
Another story.
And I remember getting on my hands and knees and twisting this rope around. And I also know that my dad was strict with his disciplining of his children. I remember one day we were playing out in the yard. This is the funny part that we had growing up. And Ray and Mark and I were playing out in the yard. And I got mad at Ray. So I grabbed my dad's halters that he put beside his barn, and I went up and threw them in the well. It was just the brick in that was up so far, and then it was covered over. I threw the halters down the well. When my dad come in to put his horses into the barn, he said, "Ruth, go get my halters. I want to put them on my horse to give him some water, tie him up." And I said to him, "Dad, I threw them down the well." He said, "Why did you put them down the well?" I said, "I got mad at Ray." "Go down to the barn," he said, "there's a rope. I want you to bring that rope up here to me." I thought I was getting the rope for the horses. Instead of that, he tied the rope around my stomach, and he put me down the well. As I went down the well, he says, "Now you hang tight to the rope with your hands." So I hung tight to the rope, and when I got down to the water, there was a little ledge that they had bricked up. And when I stepped on this ledge, there was a great big toad, and it jumped into the water, and oh, it just scared me to death. Then I heard my dad say, "Have you got the halters?" And I said, "Yes, get me out of here." So he hauled me back up, and me hanging on to the halters. He got me out, he untied the rope. I went to the house and I was sick all the rest of the day. But that was something I only had to do it once to know that my dad meant what he said. Can you remember it?
Yeah. Remember another time. I always had a flipper. You know what?
Don't shoot the little birds.
I'd make bone, make a flipper. Always had one in my back pocket. I don't know, I was about 5 or 6, I guess. 5, 4, I don't know what. Always go down the field hunting lizards. They'd run around in that sand and sagebrush and that. Shoot them lizards. And I was in the summertime, I guess I got tired. Down there, I used to go down there every day. I went to sleep on a pile of hay. And everybody in this country, everybody in this area hunted for me for 6 or 8 hours. Never did find where I was. That's a big emergency in them days. I woke up and come walking up through the field with my flipper. I always had a flipper. And that's, boy, they thought I was gone. I didn't know where, but I was gone. Slept on a pile of hay all day, most of the day.
Tell us what it was like when hay time came.
Well, to begin with, cut your hay with horses, windrow it, and when it dried, you rake it. And then you go scoop under it and pile it over on a pile. Let it dry. Everybody come and help haul hay, whatever you needed. Neighbors, come and haul hay, you get yours done, you go
Help them.
help haul hay. Stack it outside in just a round stack. And hay nice, cut off, but they'd always, the thrashers and the haymen, they'd always feed them. Mother'd always feed them for dinner. And when you went somewhere else to haul, you'd always get a big meal for dinner.
That was the only time when we had the hay haulers that we got canned cream corn to put on the mashed potatoes. We got canned cream corn, and it was a delicacy then. You didn't have canned cream corn, you know. This cream corn in the can, we had that when we had the hay haulers.
Or mashed
and
potatoes.
the fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they went together. Every time you had hay hauling, you got some creamed corn to go on the potatoes.
You'd have to pitch it on with a fork and stack it on the wagon, bring it in.
You never unloaded any like I did, huh?
Well, we unloaded quite a bit by hand in some cases.
No,
Very-
I mean tipping it over.
Oh yeah, we tipped them over. Sure, we tipped them over.
The hardest job, though, was raking it. I can remember I went down, me being the oldest girl, Ray would help Pa pilot. And that was the hardest thing for me to do, to run that rake, because it had to be, you had to trip it with your foot. When you turned the corner, you had to hold the brake down so that you wouldn't break the tines out. And we had to get every bit of hay at the corner. As we turned the corner, Dad would say, "Make that a good turn, don't leave half of the hay," because he said, "I want it in a pile. I don't want to have to gather it up." And it was one hard job learning how to rake hay so they could pile it. But it was, I was always like to work with Dad. He was my pal. He taught me a lot of things that I can put to use today. Honesty was one. If he ever caught me in a lie, I knew I'd have it, because that was one thing that we didn't do. was tell lies. We were truthful and honest. We had to be honest in our money, our change. If we took an egg to the store to buy some, they used to call it Orhound, and it was little brown pieces of candy. And we used to steal the eggs, maybe one or two, and go down to get some candy. He would always know when we took eggs to trade for candy, because we always got punished for it. But we thought that was the biggest thing, to take eggs to the store to get this candy to eat, which wasn't very often, but was just a nickel's worth of candy, but it was worth it, taking the eggs to the store. You remember?
Yeah. We still got one of them old hay derricks down here to raise. We used to stack hay with, take it off the wagon. It's still sitting down there. But we put it in the barn. I think you built that barn about 29, 30.
It must have been after the cyclone hit.
Yeah.
No, it got blew down
It
in
blew
the
the top
cyclone.
off of it. I can't remember when that was.
Ours right next door was flattened.
They rode the top off of it, and we.
It blew it right completely off. It blew. I looked out the door the day Dad's barn blew down. It was one, I think a Sunday. And I looked out into the west, and I said to Dad, there is a big storm coming up down across the lake, Dad. And just as I said it, the door flew open, and my dad jumped up and looked out, and all he saw was wood a-flying. And all that was left of my dad's barn was the lean-to that we're looking at now. He had big...
No.
Yeah, it was.
The square was there. The roof was gone. The square was still there.
Well, it blew the cement posts right up out of the ground.
To differ with you.
Well,
I helped put
okay.
it back together. I helped put the roof back on. I know.
How old would you
No.
be then?
well,
Teenagers,
I
guess.
was about 17, 18 years old, because I happened to know who I was going with at the time it blew.
Do you remember when that was? I can't remember when it was.
I was born in 28,
30.
and it was 29. I was just a year old.
Yeah.
I think 29.
Bill-
He built
29.
My
that,
brother Bill was on a mission.
he built that barn
29.
in about 1924, 25. And after that wind, the whole deal went up in half a mile away, up in the top end of my place. We went up there with a hay rack and gathered up those 2x4s,
In the
2x6s,
wood for,
the wood off the roof of that barn and brought it back down. None of it was any good. We had to bring it, we brought it back down for kindling wood and stuff. But that's over half a mile away.
I can remember Dad standing in the doorway, and he says, "There goes my barn." And that was about the only time I ever saw him cry. But he stood out, looking out the kitchen door, saw his barn go, and he actually cried.
You mentioned that you had sugar beets and tomatoes as well as hay and other things. I'm sure that was a struggle.
Well, yeah, the topping beets and hoeing, you couldn't hire nobody to do it. We had to plow it and plant them and thin them and hoe them and irrigate them and throw them in a wagon, team of horses. And I think, if I remember, there was a beet dump down here by George Bennett's where
There
the
was one up
Paul
on the
and
corner
Gailey is. That came
by
later.
Willie Beezer.
That came later. But tomatoes, sometimes you'd get a crop, a lot of times you wouldn't. remember the year Bill Holt went on a mission, 27. He bought a new Ford Model T coupe about a year before he went. He went in 28, and it was the 27 Ford coupe he bought. He kept it a year, and when he went on a mission, I bought it from him. Dad gave me 2 acres of ground, I planted tomatoes on it, and that was my money. And I paid $600 for that Ford Model T coupe that was a year old when Bill went on his mission. And I run the wheels off of that thing. Gas was 9 cents a gallon. 5-gallon tank, you could fill the tank for 45 cents. Big deal, Model T Ford. And
Your tomatoes paid for it.
2 acres.
That's doing pretty good.
Well, they were good that year, but sugar beets were $6 a ton delivered. Sometimes down to 5.5. They didn't, like they do now, they test them on sugar content. They just paid them by the ton then. And you have to do all the work yourself. You couldn't.
Sometimes the winter came a little early and you had a tough time getting them out of the field.
Yes.
Of course, you're sandy there, so.
I've seen the time when
It was always tough.
you top them and throw them in a pile, and it'd snow a little bit and rain, freeze, you'd have to take a pick and go and pick them all apart before you could load them because they was froze in the pile. Then haul them down with a steel-tired wagon down to the Bennett's Corner and dump them. Then later on, I don't know when, they had a portable dump up there on the corner right across from
Roy Briggs is
Roy
there.
Briggs's. We'd haul them up there and dump them. Ray and I'd, after they'd get maybe 5,000–6,000 tons dumped there, and after the beet harvest was over, the sugar company would pay us 50 cents a ton to throw them on a wagon and haul them down there and load them on boxcars down to Bennett's. And we thought that was big money. Throwing them on and haul them down there and dump them and come back and throw on another load.
I can remember one year Ray went to college, Mark went to school. Dad had to have somebody help him with these beets, so I was elected. And he always said, when we get the beets done, I'm going to take you to Ogden and I'll buy you the best coat that you pick. So, I thought that was going to really be neat to think I was going to have a winter coat. So boy, did we ever work to get his beets out. And when we got them out, he took me to Ogden. We hunted all over for a coat. And finally, I got a coat, $15. I was as proud of that coat as if it was a mink, because I felt like I had a goal to work for, and it was that coat. And I never forgot it. It was a real treasure in my life to think that I could earn my coat. And he bought it for me. But every day or two when I'd get discouraged, he'd say, well, when we get them done, I'll take you to town and we'll get you a coat. I think I was more interested in the coat than I was getting the beets done.
Let's talk a little bit about the schools you went to and maybe who some of your teachers were. You mentioned riding the horse over there.
We went, most of us, I guess, grade school went down to Syracuse Elementary. It was there. The date on that, when it was built, 1912, 11?
Well, depends
Well-
on which school you're talking about.
That's
The elementary.
Syracuse.
Yeah. 1900 it had 2 rooms. About 1912 it had 4 rooms, and then
I can remember the 4 rooms. And
who were some of the teachers then?
the teachers I had was A.R. Anderson, O.B. Anderson, Ed McCook, and Bodley,
May Bodley.
May Bodley. And that's, I think, about all the teachers they
I
had.
think May Bodley taught everyone in the 4th grade, even you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Mabel
And my
Wood from
kids, too.
Bountiful. She's your relative.
Yeah, she's my cousin.
She taught me when I was in, I think, the 3rd and 4th grade up here.
But then they had a high school over here.
On the corner.
2000 and 700.
Hamlin's Corner up there.
Yeah.
Peter Christensen's then.
And that, I think that was just a wooden building and one classroom, and I think Ray and
I went there.
George Bennett and Jim Rampton and William Bill Beezer, Henry Rampton and Fay Child. And well, then they went there, and then when I started over to Davis, they had one school bus, an old Dodge, with just a straight bed on it.
Do you remember who drove that?
They started at 1924,
Who drove it?
25. Paul Williams. Paul Williams was the driver, and I remember going up there between the viaducts. Used to have these 2 viaducts. And it was a narrow wheelbase, no dual tires. And we was getting into a little mischief. We'd all stand up and lean to one side and back to the other side and lean to this side, and we'd get the bus going this way.
Run.
We thought that was a big deal. Right up here between the viaducts, we done that, and it went off and tipped over. That was the end of that. We all got in trouble over to Davis, and Paul Williams put a bump on his head about that big. Nobody was hurt except a few bumps, but
Well,
they just got it to rocking, tipped it over on the side.
they tied a sack of Bull Durham on the exhaust one day, and all the fumes of this sack of Bull Durham come up into the bus,
No,
and we all got sick, and we went home that day.
that was exhaust fumes.
Well, I know, but the reason why we did it was this tobacco that they tied on the exhaust that stopped it from the exhaust going out. But that was terrible.
They never had a door in the back, an escape door in the back. So we had to bust the windows out of one side and climb out of the side of the bus to get out of it. And there was about, I think there was about 20 students is all they had. From this area going to Davis High School.
Well, didn't they condemn that school up there, that North Davis
Well,
Junior
they
High?
just done away with it when they started taking them to Davis. They started busing them. And that was our bus.
I think they wanted to consolidate and have only
Yeah.
one school. My sister Portia graduated from there. You about her age? Was she older? than
She's
you?
older.
She's
She's
raised
older
up.
than me. She's about 86, isn't she?
Yeah.
86.
Well, all they had over there was a desk and a big round wood coal stove to heat that place over there.
Well, they
North
had
Davis Junior.
they had a
high
cooking
school.
room because I took cooking there. But I don't know whether it was.
Well, they built on several
Yeah,
times.
It was a wooden lean-to where the kitchen was and the sewing room was. And Miss Polson from up the Brigham City was our domestic teacher. She was a big, tall lady, and boy, did she know how to do stuff. She was quite educated in sewing.
Well, that's good on the schools. Maybe we ought to drop back. Who were you named after, Mark?
My great-grandfather.
Great or just
Your
Great.
grandfather.
Grandfather, yeah, on Dad's side.
an,
I've got a picture of him somewhere, but that's,
tell us a little bit about him.
I can't remember him.
He died before.
Okay,
He died when our dad was 12 or 13 years old. And our grandmother raised him.
that's when Dad used to,
Raised
see
the
in
kids.
Bountiful, they used to raise gardening crops, cantaloupes, watermelons, all that stuff, take it to the farmer's market in Salt Lake. And he started hauling that stuff down there with a wagon when he was 12 years old, because he was the oldest. He had to haul it down to Salt Lake, and he couldn't even count money. He'd have to put the money in a sack, and bring it home to grandmother, or his mother, so she could count it and see what they got out of everything. He was 12 years old, he ran a team down there and back to sell that produce, and then she'd have to count the money when he got home. He never couldn't count it.
How many was in this last family of
Four.
Mar? Four?
Four sons.
All four sons. I know three of them. There's.
Uncle Jess, Uncle Omer, Uncle Alan, and Dad.
Did Omer ever come this way?
Lived in Bountiful. She knows more about him.
Uncle Omer lived down here by the store.
He lived down
And
there on
then
30th
I know when he
property,
first
so-
moved here, he lived in a little house down there. And then when the Thurgoods, he happened to be able to rent the Thurgood farm down here. He moved into the Thurgood house.
He started
A
farming.
little house in the back. I think it was Dade Thurgood.
On
was-
30.
Well, Dade was living there, and then Uncle Omer lived in a little house back of where Dade Thurgood lived. And then he had a get rich scheme and went to Idaho to live. And he went up to Idaho for a while and then moved back into Bountiful. He lives about 3 blocks from where I live.
Now Alma and Jess lived up
Well,
there.
to begin with, Uncle Alan came from Bountiful too, along about the same time Dad did. And he bought a farm up here across from the cemetery, where Anderson's in that area, Anderson or anyway, that 40 acres in there. He lived in a 2-room home up there for quite a long time. And Uncle Jess lived up here where the Navy base is, right where
In a little house just
little
below.
Holtz had some property there, and he farmed up there.
Bert Holt.
No,
It was Matt Holt's parents
Oh,
owned the.
well, that's my Uncle George then.
Well,
George Holt, yeah.
he owned that piece of land where Uncle Jess lived. It was a little red brick house run this way, lengthways.
no, it's just that way.
Well, what's this
Well,
one?
he lived in this one front this way.
That's
There was
what
one
I
west
said.
of it that went the other way. He didn't live there.
He didn't live in that one, and then
No.
Uncle Almy lived just a little farther.
There was a Nelson who owned a farm right up in there, but I don't know whether that was before your time or before this time or not.
Well, George Reed owned the one on the corner there. See that street where those quick stops are? Used to go run straight north up to the Rio Grande track. George Reed lived on the corner, then you go on up, it was Criddle,
Yeah.
what's his name?
Holt lived up there
And
too.
then,
D.
Matt
Nelson,
Holt.
or K. Nelson was up on a
Kay
corner.
Nelson was on the other northeast side of the road. And I think the one you're talking about lived right directly across from Reed's on the corner. Nelson?
Well, yeah. I don't know without looking on it, I was just wondering. Okay, and then Alma, I remember Alma living right next to Jess there, across the street from Leon Waits when I was a kid.
Yeah. Then when the Navy base came in not 39, 49, when was it built?
About 39.
39. They bought him out, and he bought Les Ellis' place over here. A couple of years after that, and moved over there. Uncle Jess died
About that same time.
about that same time with appendicitis, and it ruptured and killed him. Peritonitis killed him. And Uncle Al died here about 10 years ago.
Well, your grandfather must have been fairly old when he married this second
Yeah.
He was.
time. Now, how many do you have in his first family?
14, I think. Wasn't there? He had 14 children. Did he have
Something like
14 or
that.
10?
Well, that's where the Holbrooks and
Smedleys.
his first wife's daughters, he had quite a few daughters. And I remember Dad used to talk about it. And then we got involved in Smedleys, Holbrooks, who else?
Stringhams.
Stringhams and Barlows. That's where we're all involved in relatives way back. It's from his first wife. Then my grandmother Esther, she was Esther Lauder, was her name, Lauder, cook, had the 4 boys. But I don't know, Dad used to talk about them, there's a bunch of girls, first wife.
Now, I know two of these sons came here to Syracuse.
One was Uncle Aim.
Aim, David.
And one was Uncle
Amos, that'd be
Dave.
Walt's father,
And Uncle Dave.
and he was the first bishop of Syracuse,
Yeah.
1895. And he was bishop in 1893 of what was called South Hooper Ward then, which consisted of Clinton, Syracuse, and
Uncle Aim, you mean?
David,
Amos.
David Cook.
David.
Well, it was always Uncle Aim to me.
Amos,
We
David?
always called him Uncle Aim.
Yeah.
Now,
Lived right there where, that's
Straight down the street.
same place Harold Wilcox lived for quite a few years.
now that's Amos Cook. That's Walt's father.
That's the guy we're talking about.
Yeah, but he wasn't bishop.
Well, I don't know who you've got bishop, but
Sam Cook's father.
that was
Yeah.
Uncle Dave.
Yeah, he was a bishop.
Yeah. Patriarch. Yeah.
Now Amos had a couple of wives, I think. Did both of them live here in Syracuse?
No. One was Aunt Ad, and she lived here, and then the other one lived in Bountiful. Her name was Mary Frances.
I see. I'm sure Walt has given us some. I didn't go to that interview with Walt Cook, but he talked about it, so I won't get involved. But up until about 2 years ago, I knew there's 3 sets of cooks, but I had never connected Bishop David Cook to Ruth as a
That was
half-brother.
my grandfather's first wife. They had quite a family. I don't know how, about 12, 15, something like that.
I think there were 14, according to the
Well, I said over
genealogy.
here that I know.
Don't, I think there was 14 children. And then there was the 4 boys. I think they had 18.
Any questions you want to ask that you're about, you're welcome. Well, that's interesting.
I'll probably think of a lot of things after.
Yeah, well, we'll try to think of them now. We don't want to get you too tired. We usually go about an hour and a half. We got another.
Oh, we're good till.
Well, it's all right.
Good, we've been just 1 hour.
That's
So-
all right. Don't-
We'll go another 30 minutes anyway, if we can, keep you going. I may run out of questions here. David Cook, since we've been mentioned him, he had 160 acres there. About the old tithing house?
No. I could.
In Bountiful or here?
No, that the bishop had then. Of course, you'd come a little later. It was probably gone. He sold it to Ed Bills, or the church, the ward sold it to Ed Bills. And it was down on his property for a while. And we were surprised. Marion, you've seen it, haven't you?
I went with you.
Little Ed Bills, that's a grandson that lives down where Bacon Clonch lived.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We went down there, and there's where the tithing house is.
It's still there?
Still there.
Well, did they used to pay produce for their tithing then?
Yeah. And it was right there. You remember where David Cook's home was, just on the bluff
Yes.
there, or what we call
Yes.
now, I forget what family's been there. Just below Ben Cook's home there on the corner. It was right between Ben Cook's home and that last home.
I don't remember.
It's located. And then across the street about where Heber Cooper's home was where they stored the hay. This other was more of a granary for wheat and stuff like that. And this is when he was bishop, and they say the rock foundation and everything is still there, but it's cluttered up. Well, that's neither here nor there.
Before my time.
I think, isn't that house, that old 2-room house we lived in over there on,
Uh-huh. It's up on Jenna
it's
Street.
still over there.
They've added on to it.
Put a lean-to on it, but it's still there.
But you've got a picture, I think if you go through your stuff, we had a picture of our first home that the folks had. I don't have it, maybe some of the family does.
They moved it. It's still over there on Gentile Street.
Be
I know it
interesting.
is, yeah.
I know my dad and his first wife Sarah had a little house for many years, was in behind there, and they lived in it. It was made out of redwood. And Bill burnt that a few years ago, and I really didn't realize what was happening. Or I'd never let him burn it. I think we should have kept it.
I can remember your mom. As I would come home from school, you know, and it would be cold, she'd watch for me, her and Aunt Kate, at different times. They would take me in as I come up the street with wet shoes. They would take me in, take my shoes off, take down their oven door and dry my shoes and socks out. Give me some, maybe just some bread and jam and some hot chocolate. Done that many and many a times at your mother's home, where they took me in as I was coming home from school, soaking wet. The only way, we never had galoshes in those days. When our mother killed a chicken, she would render the fat out of the chicken, and we would oil our shoes with the chicken fat that she got that she cooked out of the chicken. And that was all the waterproof we had. They would take my shoes off and dry them and bring the grease all out good and send me on my way. But I used to like to just watch for them, so they would take me in and get my feet dry.
That's nice. Don't you think the winters seem to be more severe, more snow then?
I'm sure they were.
We could
Positive of that.
we could play jump over double dare you jumping over the posts that stuck out of the ground in the snow as we went to school.
It had hard crusts on it.
It was real hard, and
Well,
we,
down here, I can remember down the field, the wind, that north wind and east wind would blow for a week at a time. And as that snow drifted, it'd freeze. You could almost ride a horse right over the fences. You could walk anywhere in no fences, just see the top of the posts. And cold, I think the year we were married, on most of the records, well, the one record for the coldest was set in December of 32, was 35 below here.
That's the one that we haven't beat this year.
Haven't beat it yet. That was cold. The whole month was cold.
This reminds me, and I'm sure you did this since you mentioned your horse. Did you ever pheasant hunt from your horse, not with a gun, just followed on tracks and
I never did.
jumping on them?
I might have done with a flipper, but not with a horse. No.
Seemed like I remember sometimes, not necessarily on a horse, but you get those drifts and then you know there's a pheasant in there and you could plump in on it. I don't know if I ever caught one or not.
We'd take a dog and go up along the ditches and looking for them. They'd crawl back in there and you could catch them, but not on a horse. You couldn't, as deep as that snow was, sometimes you couldn't ride a horse through it. And I've seen along this road, I can't remember the year, snow was built plowed up so high you couldn't see a car go down the road. And we had to dig a kind of a tunnel like deal out to the road. Get the mail, it's about that deep. Just build a channel through it.
Hmm.
you know, when we went to school, we weren't living far enough away from the schoolhouse for allow us to ride the school bus, the wagon. I remember Thompson Jane used to be the driver of the school bus, and they would come down on the half-mile mark and pick all them up, and then we would have to walk to school. We never was able to be eligible to ride because we didn't live far enough away from the school.
That's the way it is now with buses.
And
Some
then
of the buses, yeah.
when we went to school and they trucked us to Davis, we met up on the corner. We had to walk. Sometimes we couldn't get there and sometimes we did. Come home from school, and a lot of the kids, when we went to school, getting back to school, it seems like they would have bring from home fancy dishes or sandwich or little snacks to eat at noon. And we wouldn't take any lunch because there would never be anything for us to make a sandwich. Maybe we would take a fried egg between 2 loaves of bread or some jam, slices of bread, and that would be our lunch at school. So we would hurry home from school so that Mama would always have a hot lunch, dinner ready for us when we got home.
Take your lunch to school, you'd have 2 bacon powder biscuits and some bacon in between them.
And a fried egg.
Pint of milk, a boiled egg or a fried egg. And some of them people in the grade, they'd eat the lunch inside because it was cold. We'd set it down here beside us, so nobody could see what we had.
Theirs probably wasn't any better.
I can
No one
remember.
filled you up anyway. What's the matter if it's steak or beans? Just so you got what you needed.
I remember coming home talking about hot loaves of bread. My mother used to bake 8 loaves every other day
Yeah,
with pretty good sized family like yours, I'm sure. But I always loved hot bread and honey, and my favorite was when she'd do a big ham hock with a pot of navy beans.
I remember
Did
one
your
day.
mother ever make head cheese out of pork?
Yeah, I remember eating that.
I don't know, they don't do that. I don't know whether
Well, but
anybody's got the recipe
You
of
mention
it or
head
not.
cheese, and they just turn over. Oh, don't mention that to me. Anything that's made out of a pig's head, they don't want it, no part of it. I've said head cheese at different times, and they just take ooh, that sounds gross.
Yeah, we'd serve the oatmeal for breakfast, and what was left over, you cook a bowl that big,
I
then
can
Fry it
let
at
it
night.
cool,
and then fry it.
slice it, and fry it.
I've eaten that.
Yeah,
Well, see, I went through those depression years. I can remember those.
Well, I can remember one time after Christmas holidays, we went to school, and the teacher wanted us to stand up and tell what a nice Christmas we had, what we had for Christmas dinner, and I was kind of late getting up there, and when we had Christmas, we would have one gift, and we would hang our socks up, so we would get candy and peanuts. If we didn't hang our socks up, we had to share a bowl full. So one day I was sitting there and I thought, oh, I can't stand up in front of this class and tell what my parents had for Christmas, what we had for Christmas dinner. I felt ashamed to tell the school class what I got. So when it come my turn, I really built it up. And I had one of the best menus planned in my mind that we had for dinner that Christmas. Was nowhere near what we had. But I wanted to be right along with my school chums and have equal to what they had. And it bothered me a long time to think that I exaggerated what I got for Christmas. And I remember that year Dad went up to Layton, and he come home with oranges that big. And he said, now I got an orange for each one of you. You can have that Christmas morning. And if you get in them and eat them, the one that has taken one won't get any. So Christmas morning, there was 7 oranges and one for Mom and Dad. But they were put up on top of an old cupboard we had. And we never touched those oranges. So we could have an orange for Christmas morning. But yet, we undone one gift, and that was it. And now, they have so many packages that they don't know what they got, who give them, they're nothing.
Well, I think everybody, not only us, in Syracuse,
But
around the area, same way.
everybody.
I got a
You went through it, you
little red wagon one year, and boy, that was the greatest. That
We got
was
a
the greatest
sleigh.
thing.
You know,
Mhm.
one of them little, with
Runner.
a whole bunch of us.
Yeah.
That was really something.
Yeah.
But everybody's the same way.
I remember I sold seeds to the farmers here. A packet I walked and I went all over this town to sell little seed packages for a little watch, wristwatch. When I got it, it had a ribbon strap to hold it on. And I didn't like it. So my mother bought me for Christmas a little metal watch band to put on my watch. After I got the watch band, my watch quit running. But I wore it anyway because I was proud of that little strap that I had got for Christmas. And on the package it said 3.5. And I thought, could they afford that? That was a lot of money to me. A little watch band that I cherished all my life.
Here's an area maybe we could touch upon. You mentioned about taking eggs down and turning them into the store, and I remember when I was a kid, maybe even before I was born, they had the same. If you spent a nickel on a punch board, you might hit a home run or something like that. Could you describe what Walker Brothers store was? This is before Central Merc down on the corner.
The Walker Brothers store.
Yeah.
Dan Walker, yeah. He had a few household items, and he had cold meat. Once in a while you could buy cut meat, roast, but not very seldom. Kitchen utensils, little clothing. You maybe buy a shirt, or I don't remember many shoes. And then he had a
Was Bessie Gailey there at that
candy
time?
counter.
No,
And he'd
I
have
can remember that.
gumdrops and that horehound and all different stuff in there, and you get a whole sack full for one egg, like that.
Mm.
And but I don't. He'd cut just some meat. No refrigeration. I don't think they had refrigeration, so I don't think they could keep some meat then.
A big ice box,
But
wasn't it?
I can't remember.
I can
selling
remember
much
a big
meat.
ice box there.
But you could buy utensils there, pots and pans, and just household ware,
Well, didn't
flour.
didn't he
Like
have a bunch
flour.
of things in back too? You could buy lumber.
He had
and
coal
Coal.
and grain for your cattle. Didn't he have grain back
Don't
there?
remember.
He had
No.
a granary back there with
Oh,
by
that
his
was
coal
Dave.
shed.
Dave Thurgood had that.
Well, he had it too because Papa used to go down there
Made them.
and get some of the grain for his cattle, for his cows and his whatever he used to
But you
feed
could
the
get
pigs,
lard and cheese and flour,
and sugar.
sugar and bacon.
You'd walk clear
Mm.
down there to get a quarter's worth of sugar, bring it home in a sack like that, and carry it. You had to walk to get it and then walk home. And carrying it from one side to the other, you had to make sure that you didn't get a hole in the sack and lose half of your sugar. It was quite a deal.
Uh,
Whatever happened to that old store? I can't remember.
It's just been
Did
added
they-
on, hasn't it?
Tear it down or move it?
well, I'll tell you what happened, because I become a little bit part of it. When I was 14, I was hired as a hod carrier during the summer, and Duncan Brothers from Centerville built George's, the old part of George's store out of brick. It wasn't as big, and Howard took the other old one, part of it, and put it in, and they had, remember, a pool hall, and he had a soda fountain,
One pool table. Yeah.
a soda fountain place, and served lunches and things like that. And then part of it was also the service station that they had. Now this part that Howard had was bought by Dahl, Lloyd Dahl.
Yeah.
And they moved it up there, and it's still there.
Still there.
Still there, and he used a free sheet metal shop.
Yeah.
And so that's the main part of the store. Some of the other buildings and that I think were small that
And
they
then
had in the
right where
back.
Walt Cook's house is, there used to be Homer Walker's barber shop.
15 cents a haircut.
Yeah, about that. And there wasn't
Shaving a haircut, 2 bits.
wasn't very good haircuts on me either. But that's where the barber shop was. Then the old music.
And he had a lot of confectionery candy,
Yeah.
remember?
You could buy licorice, the black sticks of licorice and that twisted licorice.
Now you mentioned the amusement hall.
And then there's that amusement hall. I
Yeah,
remember,
it was east of the church, wasn't it?
yeah, I remember the main thing about that, when I can remember, was Bill Holt, Ray, used to trap skunks up in the,
Oh,
up above, up in the field. And they caught one afternoon. They had a long wire on the trap. I don't know whether they shot it or what. Anyway, they drug it down and didn't know what to do with it till later. It was getting late, dark. And down in the amusement hall, they had an old coal bin out in the back. You remember that big coal bin they shoveled, had the coal in? They stuck that skunk in that coal bin and left it there for about 2 weeks. Never did do anything with it. Well, we went down to a movie down there one night, and you couldn't stand to stay inside. And they didn't hold anything in that amusement hall for quite a while because that skunk was in there.
Let's take a break.
Hello.
About the amusement hall, it was quite a big building, and they had room for basketball floor and dancing, and then they had an upstairs in the back where they cut holes, and we used to go down and take the movie projectors up, and we'd have silent movies in there. And North Davis used to play basketball, dances, church dances. They had quite a
Do you remember any old smokers they used to have in there?
few. Yeah, I remember like putting up boxing and
Yeah. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling?
yeah. I remember they put up a ring right in the middle, and Ray and Bill Beezer had a boxing match one night, and our weight used to wrestle. Him and Joe Cook and Dave Walker, they had a few wrestles down there. But them days when they wrestled, they'd get a hold on you like an arm lock or a leg lock or whatever, head lock. And it ain't like it is now. You just have to give up. Say, I've had enough. You win. Now all they do is beat each other around and don't. But other than that, the movies and dancing and basketball games. Well, we had our school programs down there. I remember we
our
got
shows.
Snow White and
Cinderella.
Cinderella.
Took a leading part in the Cinderella show.
North Davis High School used to do a lot of big
Yeah, they
shows.
used to come down and have, operettas they called them. And I seem to think and remember things about my dad. The Relief Society used to give what they called a reunion every year. And the Relief Society would go down and put up a feed for when the people come at night.
Yeah. I remember I got a piece of pumpkin pie down that one of them that same time. Put it on my hand and the filling all ran out.
So
They didn't have
my mother, she was down there working all day, and it was up to my dad to bring us kids down for the party at this old recreation hall. And after they had eaten, it was turned into a dance. And our dad always was full of the devil. He was always up and going. So they started, do you see my new shoe? Do you see my new shoe? with the tip on the toe, with the tip on the toe. Well, my dad got up, and our mother had arthritis quite bad, and she couldn't dance. So he went and got Rube Holbrook. And they went out on the floor, and my dad walked over to a window he had that they had in it, and took his old black hat, put it on, pulled it down over his place, and him and Rube Holbrook went around that hall 40 miles an hour to the tune of Do You See My New Shoe? And he could get it off, and when they done the plain quadrille, my dad could do it. Don't think he couldn't. So after it was all over and things quietened down, there was a certain gentleman in the Syracuse ward went up to my dad, and he said, Rudolph, we're going to have to ask you to leave. You're drunk, and you can't be around these people intoxicated. And my dad was highly insulted. He threatened this man, and he was going to beat him up.
Well, he didn't black his eye right there.
He grabbed him. He had his hat pulled down over his eyes. He didn't even have his hat off. And he said to this guy, look, I'm not drunk. He said, I was dancing to a dance that we danced all our life. If you're going to throw me out for that, it'll take a bigger man than you. And it took the bishop and everybody else to get my dad calmed down until the party was over. And I think my dad resented that right up till the day he died. He never liked being called a drunken man at a amusement hall and a party that they were having.
Well, he sure hell wasn't drunk. He didn't join in drinking.
He just acted like it. This here dance, you know, you go around the hall, hippity hopping, do you see my new shoe, and then you slide, and with the tip on the toe, and then you slide, and then you waltz, and then you do it some more. Well, they just didn't like the way my dad was acting, but
well, they
he
used
was
to go,
mad.
him and Ruth Ellis and
Yeah.
Layla Ellis and Les Ellis and all of them would go down to Bountiful every
To a
week.
dance, yeah.
Some big dance hall down there and have a,
Haley's Hall. They used to
big
go to
dance.
Haley's Hall before they tore it
and
down.
they couldn't wait for that. They couldn't wait for that to come.
But
Friday night or Saturday night or something, they'd all, everybody, all the people they knew was down there.
You mentioned the Relief Society put on a big feed on those. Seems like I've heard, or maybe even remember as a boy, that even during the daytime, between the church and the hall, they had a big grove out there, and they had foot races and
that was on the 4th of July,
Pillow
or
fights.
the 24th of July. They would have, they would have booths and all that.
And put one log between that tree over there and this tree
Yeah.
here and have pillow fights, and the bishop and the counselors and all of them would have pillow fights, knock each other off, and that was the big deal. Yeah.
and then they have a big baseball game too.
Yeah.
Then they have a big baseball game up there on the park, and when we was, see, I started playing baseball with, Syracuse had just a regular baseball team. Anybody go play. And I started playing with them about 1929 or 30, 31. And there was Dave Walker, Horace Barber, Roy Briggs was the coach, Joe Cook, and Marlon Gailey, not Marlon, the other one. Newell Gailey, Buck Holbrook. And I still hear about it from Buck, about putting it down over the hill. And they'd have it, everybody in Syracuse, it closed down on Saturday afternoon, no farming, no water, go down to them baseball games. And if you didn't go, you'd like being up here, you had something you had to do, you could hear them yelling from here on that baseball game.
And they toot the horns when a
Yeah,
home
that's a
run.
big thing, blow their horns. They play Kaysville and Plain City, and I remember I pitched 2 games down to Lagoon. They played Plain City, and then they played at Bingham. Pitched 2 games, and we beat them both. And it was a big deal, baseball.
Did Eli Cooper either have a stallion pen or a pig pen or something? They was always
Stallion.
saying stallion,
Stallion pen.
and they was always wanting to knock it into stallion pen. But it seems like once
Yeah,
you
they
got
say
it down over
hard.
that hill, you got a home run.
They'd holler, hit Cooper's stallion pen. That's what we're after. And if we went down over the hill, I remember Buck Holbrook, he couldn't run very fast. Dave Walker, he'd run fast. He'd go around them bases. And Buck was on first base, and Dave hit one way down there. He run over Buck before he got to home plate. Buck always still tells about that.
Yeah. Now we've interviewed Buck.
Have you?
By the way, we could just say, if you ever want to see some of these others to reminisce, we got them where you can check them out.
Yeah. But this baseball in Syracuse was a big deal.
Yeah, they closed the garages.
Everything was closed on Saturday. For years they'd done that. Roy Briggs was coach, and he coached for quite a long time.
This-
and they had quite
This
a
before
game.
the Hanson brothers got involved.
Yeah, no Hansons. We had Charlie Walker, Dave Walker, Arnold Miller, Joe Cook. And they played for years, and they were good. They could beat anybody around. Plain City, Salt Lake. We even went up to
Peterson.
in the Utah-Idaho tournament and played teams from Idaho.
Hmm.
Good ball teams. They had some good ones.
That sounds like the good old days.
Yeah, I don't want too good old days, but the only thing they say about good old days, in them days we didn't know anything different. Now, what you know, and then go back to what was then, pitching hay, and tipping the load over and shoveling it back on. And I remember when you sold a load of hay, we'd sell a load of hay, deliver it to Ogden. We'd put it on a hay rack with a team of horses, tie it on with ropes, haul it over to Ogden, and then load it, and then come back home for about $4 a ton. That's big money.
And you couldn't have too much on the wagon either.
Well, it would
Wouldn't be
shake
too
and
big.
shake and shake.
You'd lose half of it.
Shake to one side and half the load would slip off.
Yeah, going that far.
Well, did Grandpa ever have a lot of cows or anything in milk?
Well,
Cows?
about 10, it seems like to me we got started into about 8 or 10 years after we moved up here. Built this little barn here. I think it's still, we had about 12 head. And we'd send, usually 12, 14 head, we'd send 2 10-gallon cans of milk every morning. Clyde Hanson would come and pick it up. He'd have 4 head of horses on that old double-decker wagon, and then we'd have to cool it and set it out in front. He'd come and throw it up in there. And
You had your own little milk house
yeah, we had to go there. Tore it down.
by your
Wasn't that-
well, so you could
Yeah, right by the well.
you could have water going in it.
And
You'd
it was
have to
cool.
cool it.
It was
We had a
cold
thing
though.
to stir it with, and the water was cold, and you cooled it, and then 'cause time you got it over there with the wagon over to Ogden, sometimes it'd be sour and then they wouldn't pay you for it. But, that well we had, well, I mentioned about 12, 14 feet deep, with them big 3-foot clay tile down, about 3 of them, 4 of them. And then we had a line out to the barn in a tub. And you run a line underground up through into the bottom of the tub for water, and you'd stand there and pump for
Until
maybe twice a day for about 2 hours, pumping them 12, 14 head of milk cows with all the heifers and the horses. We had to pump the water and let it run down there for them to drink. Boy, that was a job. That old pitcher pump.
But that well, though, Mama used to use that well for her refrigerator. She used to put her milk down
You'd
there.
hang it down there.
She'd hang it down, and her lunch meat and things she wanted to keep cold, she'd lower it down into the well, and then when we got ready to eat, we'd draw it up.
Well, Dad, I remember the well, and then right behind it was kind of a shack.
Coal
It was
house.
a coal
Coal
house,
house.
wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had the coal house. We could put about 6 ton of coal in it. Had a window in the back, and that's we'd have to haul coal, get it up to Clearfield Lumberyard. There used to be lumberyard up there. Old Nelson used to run it. What was his name? Anyway, we'd fill it up for winter and get it up to Clearfield. You'd have to haul it with a wagon. And that was what we call a coal shed. And then the well was right by it.
Then you had your kindling place too.
Yeah, that was
Well, that was put into one side.
that was my job to get kindling in. If it was well, I'd have to put it in the oven and dry it.
You know, all these
Start a fire.
people wanting to get these stoves and wood burning stoves and everything, I said, gee, I worked all my early life with kindling coal, and I so happy when gas got, I'm not gonna go back to that.
I can remember when Dad, when they first put the gas in, we had
Oh,
a
he
big
was
coal
mad.
range, and you could stand up by it and get good and warm. Stand behind it with he stand by the stove with his hands behind his back. And when they put the gas in and took that coal range out, he says, I'm going to freeze to death. You just can't, it's just different.
Can I tell you a little bit of, this would include a religious story on my mother. It seems like mostly all of it is about Dad, but I'm going to tell one on Mama. Her patriarchal blessings
Now this
said,
is Martha, right?
Martha, her patriarchal said, if she lived true and faithful, she would feed one or the 3 Nephites, would eat at her table. So I can remember I was about 14, 15 years old. We had eaten and we were outside. It seemed like we always got outside after a meal and had our fun, or we was getting ready to go to the field. Down the driveway, it seemed like all of a sudden there was a man, and he come down to the driveway, and Dad was standing by the back porch. This man come up to my dad and he said, we would like to know if you could spare some food. We're traveling and we're hungry. He said, we're resting down here by the willows. There used to be a strip of willows, and he said, we're resting down there and we would like to know if you could give us something to eat. And my dad said, well, I just fed 7 hungry mouths. If there's anything left, you're welcome to it. So he called Mama and she come to the door and she scraped up, I don't know what else she had, but she had almost a half a gallon of cold milk that we had rigged up out of our well. And she had made apple pie for dinner and there was one left. She gave this man the milk and the pie, and there was something else that went along with the biscuits that she'd ate. And he come down into this willow part and they ate. And Mama was quite concerned about it because we never seen the man until he got right in our midst, and it seems like he left the same way. And when he come back, he brought 2 come back with him, and they thanked my mother for the food. And when he left, he said, "God bless you, Martha. That was delicious, and you saved our lives because we were sure hungry." And with that, he disappeared. And I thought, well, he's come so quick, I'm going to watch where he goes. And I could never find out where he went to. Mama was quite amazed over it, and she talked a lot about it. And she said, "I wonder if it could have been one of the 3 Nephites, seeing that he comes so suddenly." She always thought that she would be prepared for when they come to her table, she would have some super to give them. But all they got were scraps. But when he left, I'll never forget it. "God bless you, sister." And then he left. And she always felt, and she talked a lot about it, that she figured that it was one of the 3 Nephites, or the 3 Nephites that had just happened to get their meal. But it thrilled her. She was quite excited about it for a long time.
Well, we got you wore out.
No?
If there's any more else you wanted to know. But this story was in her patriotical lesson, and she kept saying, "I am going to live a good enough life so that can happen. Because I want to be able to feed them if they ever come to my table."
I always wondered, years ago, when, see, that was 9 of us, what a rough deal it would be for her to figure out what to clothe and feed 9 people.
Without having much to start out with in the
Nothing
first
to
place.
start out with. It's all right for Dad and the kids and everybody to work on the farm, but that's only part of it.
It was bringing in
How do you feed 9 and clothe 9?
on nothing.
All the washing, all the bread baking, bake all the bread and clean. I don't know.
Well, I can remember when I was a kid, I was in the 8th grade and I played on the girls' baseball team. And when I was young, I had my leg broke. And for a while, I had to wear shoes that laced up to protect my ankle. So we started to play ball, and my shoes that I wore got a pretty good beating. And Mama was really upset. She said I wasn't going to be a tomboy and play ball. And wear my shoes out like that, I wasn't going to play ball. And my dad said, "Oh, yes, she is. If she wants to play ball, she's going to play ball." And my mother says, "Well, look at her shoes. What are we going to do?" And he said, "Somehow we'll get her another pair of shoes when these is gone. But up to now, she's going to play ball." And I thought, oh, how super you are to let me play ball, because I loved it.
Gladys did too, didn't she?
Yeah, Gladys paid.
Yeah, I remember her.
He's into that bowling now, mostly. She,
I think she's in a lot of other things now. She come down the other day to get Shirley's car, and oh man.
but when we'd get sick, colds and croup and all that stuff, they didn't have medicines like they got now. What did, we never died from it.
Tell us about castor oil.
Oh.
Well,
Mustard plasters.
You'd get a half a glass of castor oil, and that was a cure-all for indigestion,
Everything
headache,
you
and
had.
everything. Then what was it you put on top of it? Fill the rest of the glass up with something.
Some
Might have
kind
been.
of a juice.
And boy, that was hard to take. And you could taste it for a week. But that was a cure-all. Castor oil, good old castor oil, and I never.
Well, and then when you had
That
colds,
meant-
you had mustard plasters put on your chest too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mentholatum and mustard plaster. And I can remember over here when Florence was little in that two-roomed house,
Yeah, she had
she almost died from pneumonia. And that's all you had is mustard plasters. Two cotton cloths about that square, probably out of a flour sack. And in it, you'd mix mustard
flour.
and put it all in there thick and lay it on there, and it'd burn. Oh boy, it would burn. And I remember when she was so bad, well, we set up almost all night, Dad, Mother, and you know, they thought she was last gone. And the next morning, just like that fever broke. She started talking, but you had that mustard plaster on you, continuous, and the skin was just burnt. That mother'd say, you'd have to have it on there till the skin gets real red. Then you take that off, a little
And
while
you
you get
burn.
another one. And I think that saved her life.
Well, I can remember that night, Dr. Tanner going to Mom and Papa and say, he said, Rudolph, do you know if anybody where you can get some whiskey, if you could make her a hot toddy, he says it'll help because tonight she's going to pass the crisis. But he didn't know anybody, and he never got any whiskey. He said, I don't know where I could turn to get whiskey. And he said, well, people don't realize it, but a hot toddy saved a lot of people with the flu. And he said it would help your daughter. But my dad didn't know anybody, so we just suffered it out. And when the doctor come the next morning, he expected her dead.
But she come around, the mustard plaster, it could have went either way, but that was hot on you, and you just broke it. Broke her fever.
Well, they never had no medication,
Well, all we had is mentholatum,
penicillin or nothing to give you.
mentholatum, and
Carbolic acid. Watkins carbolic.
acid. We still got that.
I do
use
too.
I got
I got it in my
my.
medicine
Swear by
cabinet.
it, huh?
We use it, and I know where you can buy it too. Right? And you'd rub and rub and rub, and we'd use this horse liniment. We used to have a bottle of liniment we got from Watkins, man. It would burn. And when we'd get a cold,
We had to take it.
we had to drink it internally.
It said external use only. Yeah, on
But
the bottle.
Mother'd take about 3 tablespoons of that liniment. Ward's liniment, they called it. That's for horses. To rub on your bones, aching bones, and pour that in a half a glass of milk, and we'd have
And
to
we'd
drink
have
it
to
before we
drink
go to
it.
bed.
And it
that
said
burned, boy, it would
external
burn.
use only, and yet we drank it.
Yep,
And
you
here
must
we
have
go on.
faith in your mother.
Castor oil, oh.
And Epsom salts, they come in on the deal too sometimes. No matter what ailment you had, it was a dose of physic. Epsom salts, castor
Well, in
oil.
them days, what we was eating, bacon, and We didn't have vegetables, nuts. Mother bought tomatoes and peaches. Yeah, but,
500
yeah.
quarts at a time.
9 times out of 10, that's what was the matter with you. You'd had too many biscuits, and you needed vegetables and fruits and stuff like that.
It's too much salt pork.
Yeah, salt pork.
In our days, we never heard of cholesterol, potassium. How did we live? Eating the food that they prepared was nothing but cholesterol. Butter, cream. We had thick cream off in the pan of milk. What Mama didn't save for butter, we had it on our food.
Well, we got about 4 minutes. Anything you want to wind up with, and then the 2-hour tape is done.
You say the prayer.
Well, you talk about starting to farm up here. When we started out, I guess they had it everywhere else, same way. Nobody was different than we were. But boy, day in and day out, that's all you done in the summer. Mowing weeds
And then at night, irrigation
Yeah,
on top of it.
and when we first started irrigating this sand, we had sand over here, so it had blew for so many years. It was so fine. You know these furrowers you have on your cultivator to make furrows down? You go along and furrow it when we first started to irrigate that sand, and it was so fine and pulverized that the furrow would fill right back in behind you. And when you turn the water in, it just flood all over. You have no So what you do is flood it the first time, and then before it got real dry, while it was still wet, you'd re-furrow it and push that mud up, and when it would dry, then you could run the water down. But if it was dry, you couldn't. And the wind blow, take all your beets and tomatoes. This place here, 90% of it was blow sand.
And I can
Goes
remember,
over on your,
you get a south wind, Bill would get it from your place, and
we used
vice
to say-
versa.
Dad used to say, well, my farm's being over there in Jess Holes now. But I can remember Bill, when Bill was farming down there and Dad'd be down there, Bill would come over and they'd sit and talk for half a day. Nothing done. We'd sit there and talk.
Well, life was so that you could back then.
But who does it now? We don't take time, don't we? Aye.
Well, I am mighty glad that Martha and Rudolph were my parents, because what they taught me when I was home has stayed with me, and I would like to think that I have passed some of that knowledge off to my kids. And I love my parents very, very much.
Well, we had the school of hard knocks, and that's when you learn,
Well,
and
we
you don't
was from
forget it.
what they called the old school,
You don't forget it.
and you know.
You're
that-
conservative,
And you know what
Know
you've
what
been taught
money's
stays
worth.
with you. Stays with you for a long
Yeah,
time.
we'd go down Lagoon, and we had an old car. The first old car we had was a 28 Oldsmobile,
Mhm.
touring. We'd go down Lagoon, and we could have 50 cents apiece.
And
Big deal.
we would save up so Mama could make sandwiches out of veal loaf. It come in a can so big. That was our day for veal loaf sandwiches, was at Lagoon.
Hmm.
That was real something.
But everybody else the same boat. There was no money.
And yet they're choice memories. Hard
Yeah,
memories, but
You
choice
learn the
memories.
hard way. You could go around Syracuse in them days when we was farming over here. and the people was money, any money at all. I don't believe everybody lived here, you'd pick up $100 if they give you every bit of cash they had. I don't believe they'd have that much.
Well, I can remember Dad saying, well, I worked all summer long for enough money to pay my taxes. So,
And live
I
off the
guess-
soil.
time he paid his water assessments and his taxes, he wouldn't have any money to take him through the winter.
But we weren't any different than anybody else.
I
in
heard him
town.
say that. I heard Dad say that a lot
Rob
of
Bodley
times.
up here, 12 kids. I used to run around with Martin Bodley and Johnny and Homer and him Bodley was like everybody else. How are we gonna feed them that many? If they grew normal, same as they do nowadays. And I think Vi's family, same way, maybe worse. You couldn't